Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today we are finally here to talk about my favorite reads from 2025. Nope, from 2024. Oh my word, I'm a little bit late with this video, so I apologize for being a little bit late, but I didn't do Vlogmas this year and that just pushes everything back. I didn't film anything when I was home at my mom's for Christmas. I just kind of enjoyed being away. So here we are, and I'm going to be telling you about my favorite books of the year. We are combining what I would normally spread out if I were doing Vlogmas. We're combining them all into one. So I will have chapters timestamped down in the description box below. We're going to start with my top 10 fiction reads because that's what everyone wants to know the most. Then I have 4 standout nonfiction reads. I didn't read very much nonfiction, but 4 of them that I loved, I'm going to talk about real quick. And then I have my top 10 middle grade fiction reads. So we're going to just get right into it because we have quite a few books. I have talked about all these books quite a bit on my channel, some of them pretty recently. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of the books. And I do have them ranked. So we are going from 10 least favorite to my top favorite. All of them are in order. I mean, ask me any other day and that order will be different, I'm sure. But today, this is where we're at. This is what we're working with. I do have 3 that I didn't put on the list, but on a different day, they might be on the list. So we will call them honorable mentions. I won't talk too much about them. The Diamond Die by Kate Quinn, historical fiction about a Russian librarian, single mom turned sniper. Yikes. She also befriends Eleanor Roosevelt. It's pretty intense and I loved it. I also really loved this kind of thriller, suspenseful novel, another suspenseful novel, Worst Case Scenario by T.J. Newman. Drowning is still my favorite, followed by Falling. This is my 3rd favorite of the 3, but what I love about T.J. Newman is her way of getting me to care so much about the characters. In this one, the pilot of the plane has a medical emergency, is unable to fly the plane, and the plane crashes into a nuclear power plant in the Midwest. And it's about the town where the nuclear power plant exists and how do they try to avert disaster. Avert? Is that the right word? And the other one that didn't quite make their list is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I put this in my favorites pile as soon as I was done reading it, but then looking today, I couldn't remember very much about the story. I know that we have these 2 rivals write letters back and forth. So it's a romance between them, but it's also this fantasy. They are trying to stop this war that is started by the gods who have come awake. They had been sleeping for a long time, something along those lines. I don't remember exactly. I do know that when I read it, I dove right into book 2 because I couldn't wait. And I really enjoyed it when I read it, but I couldn't remember it enough to put it on the list today. So here are my top 10. Number 10, The Lost Ticket by Freya Sampson. This is a book that I just hugged when I was done. I loved the found family. I love an older protagonist. In the story, we follow a young woman named Libby. She is kind of like at the end of her rope. Things are not really going great for her. She arrives in London and one of the first people she meets on the bus is this elderly man named Frank, who tells her this story of a lost connection that he had, potential lost love, that he has been riding the bus ever since, hoping to find this woman again. Libby decides she's going to help him, and along with the caregiver for Frank, they try to help Frank find his lost love. In the process, hearts are healed, friendships are formed, slight romances begin to happen. It was beautiful. I just loved it so much. It just left me with such a positive, uplifted feeling. I had to make my list at number 10. Number 9 is a completion of a series. It's a chonker, and it's The Winners by Fredrik Backman. I just love Fredrik Backman. I know his stuff doesn't work for everybody. He's got a lot more language in there than I would like normally, but this completes the Beartown series, and I just have absolutely loved this hard-hitting series about a hockey town in Sweden that in book 1 is torn apart because the daughter of the owner or the guy who runs the rink is sexually assaulted by one of the star players on the hockey team. The town takes sides and the story goes on from there. In this one, we focus on the town itself and its rival town, Head. They're kind of hockey rivals in every way. How well the town is doing is often directly related to how well the hockey team is doing. There's a lot of animosity between these 2 towns and a lot of politics involved. And in this one, a tragedy strikes towards the end. Some of the characters from all the other books are like 3 or 4 years older now. We're kind of following them through, and this one had me in tears as always. And there's a little bit of a mystery at the end as well. And I just love it. I just love it. It just works for me. And I get that it doesn't work for everybody, but it really works for me. Number 8 is one that I don't own. It's And So I Roar by Abi Dare. This is also a sequel. This follows The Girl with the Louding Voice, which I also loved. And I think that one was on my favorites list in 2023, maybe. I just love the story of Aduni. I love Aduni as a character. It's a tough book dealing with tough situations. It takes place in Nigeria. And in this one in particular, we follow kind of the plight of women in Nigeria. And in this story, there's a bunch of girls who are going to be sacrificed because the weather is bad, as if that's going to do anything. But that's part of the beliefs of this people group at the time. And Aduni and Tia, another character that's in both books, they try to speak up against this practice and the outcome of all of that. It drew me in. I love the writing style. The audiobook narrator is top notch. I don't know who it is at the moment. I listened to both on audio and they are fantastic. Fantastic books. I couldn't not put it on my list. Number 7 this year is the only book that wasn't included in my 5-star reads. This one was a 4.5-star read. I don't know why I didn't give it 5, because looking back, it probably should be a 5, because even though I didn't read it that long ago, I've thought about it a lot. And I feel like it is one that I will continue to think about a lot. And so I had to put it on the list, and that's The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I wasn't sure where I was going to land on this because it has such mixed reviews. People really love it or they really don't. And I am among those who really loved it because I love this idea of getting just a different perspective. And in this story, Nora gets a chance to see her life from a different perspective, ultimately. At the beginning, she tries to take her own life, ends up in the Midnight Library, and gets to explore all of these regrets that she thinks she has about her life. She gets to explore what would have happened if she made a different choice, and she gets to live all of these lives over and over. So it is a bit of a Groundhog Day trope. I know that that's not for everybody. There were a couple parts where it did feel a little bit repetitive, but it just kind of speeds through. It doesn't show you every single option that she takes. It kind of speeds through at times and just highlights different ones here and there that really show Nora the impact of her decisions and her choices and her conversations and the interactions that she has with people, no matter how small it may seem, the impact that has, that her life has on other people. I just thought it was really well done. I was captivated by the story, and I've thought about it a lot since then. So I had to add it to the list. Number 6 is another one that felt pretty heavy to me at the time, African Town by Irene Latham and Charles Waters. This was phenomenal. Book in verse about the Clotilde, which was the last ship that came from Africa carrying enslaved people. And we get even a perspective from the Clotilde, from the ship itself in here. The one reason this might not be up higher on my list is because there were so many points of view. I had to tandem read this. I normally could just do audio or just in print, but I loved the audio because you could hear the accent and the tone of voice, and reading in verse, I just think is so much better in audio for me. And I wanted to do it in audio, but I was just getting confused about who was who and the African names and which person are we talking about. So it was a little bit of confusion there, but it still was so important and so well done that it still got 5 stars, even with that confusion. But we go all the way from the slave ship in Africa, headed all the way over to America, and through a number of different years. We follow the people who were running the boat, sailors. We follow enslavers in America, and including men and women who were on the boat, and we follow them through all the way to African Town. They begin to create this town, the very first town that was begun, run, inhabited, everything completely by enslaved people. And I just thought it was such a fantastic story, important read, and I think it should be required reading for high schoolers. It was so good. Number 5 on my list is maybe the most lighthearted of all the books on the list, But it just gives me so much joy when I even look at the cover, and that is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q Sutanto. This is a cozy-ish mystery about a woman who runs a Chinese tea shop, and she comes down into her shop one day from her apartment above it and finds a dead man on her floor. And she calls the police. After picking up a little flash drive, she calls the police and is not thrilled about the way that they handle the situation from all of her experience in watching shows. She determines that she's going to try to find the killer herself and is confident that the killer will come back to the tea shop. Number one, because of the flash drive, and for other reasons. So she is very suspicious of all the people who are walking on the sidewalk and who kind of stop by, and it ends up being a bit of a found family. And I just love Vera Wong herself. I found this book to be funny at times and heartwarming and a fun mystery as well. So I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. So it's on the list. Number 4 is another book that I read towards the end of the year that I just had to give a little hug to when I finished. It was a quiet book and it was reflective at times, but it's Sipsworth by Simon Van Buie. I thought this book was so well done. This book follows Helen, who's an older woman who's on her own. So at the very beginning, we see her inner monologue. It's almost stream of consciousness as she's talking to herself and going through her routine of her days. She sees the neighbor put out this kind of aquarium fish tank type of a thing, and he puts it out to the trash, and she wonders if she can use it for something. So she goes out and gets it and cleans the whole thing up, and in the process discovers a little mouse. And in taking care of this mouse, we begin to meet a couple other people. Her circle of acquaintances gets larger, becomes more like a circle of friends. We learn a lot more about her backstory and about her life before, and how she was like, what role she played, like what her job was, and how smart she really is. And you just learn layer by layer by layer gets removed, and you get to know this woman, Helen, a lot better. And we get to see these people that come into her circle and how everybody reacts to her and becomes connected to her. And it was just beautiful. I really loved it. I read this over Christmas when I was home at my mom's, and it was slow and meandering and beautiful, and I just loved it. I loved it. Number 3 is the other book on this list that I do not own, and it is James by Percival Everett. I don't need to say much about this because you've probably seen this on many people's lists this year. It is the Barnes & Noble book of the year. It has been on just a ton of lists. For good reason. It's a fantastic read. I read this again just in December, and I think it's one that I'm going to think about here and there, just moving on. In this book, we follow James. He's our main character, and it's a kind of a retelling of the story of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim. It's just the story of James, who was an enslaved man, and why he ends up on the raft floating down the river with Huckleberry Finn. We see things that happen in that story from just a different perspective. It was so beautifully written, and you really just grow to care for James, and I just found him to be such a compelling character, quick-witted and funny at times, really smart at times, kind-hearted, a family man. Like, I just loved him. I just loved him. And it was an emotional read. There were a few scenes that were still very emotional, and yet it had that kind of fun feel at times that Huckleberry Finn did as well, as they're floating down the river, and some of the characters that they come in contact with, and the flooding, and they've got to hide from this person or that person. And I just really enjoyed it. I was here for it, and it made it onto my list at number 3. Number 2 this year is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. Another chunker of a book. I think this could have been my top book. Last year, Way of Kings was my top book. This could have been my top book if I didn't take so stinking long to read it. I spread this out way too long. I think I started it in August and didn't finish until November. However, I really think Brandon Sanderson is a genius. I love this story. I love how Dalinar, Adolin, like, I love how all of these characters that we met in Way of Kings, how their stories are kind of connecting and coming together and weaving together, and Ultimately, there's a war going, like almost a war happening between the Alethi and the Parshendi. And it's so hard to describe all that goes on in this book, but it's creative and the world building is phenomenal. I still don't think I have a full grasp of it, but I feel like this is a series that you could reread multiple times, because the more you know, the more you can look back and be like, oh my word, he planted the seeds for this scene ages ago. It's just woven together so incredibly well. And I can tell that even though I don't know all the things. I still don't know all the things. I feel like I left Way of Kings not sure what was even really going on. I have a little bit more of an idea of what's going on, but I still feel like there's so many unanswered questions. And yet he just draws me in so well. There are humorous scenes, there's intense scenes, there's betrayal, there's magic. Like, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And I'm loving it so much. That made it to number 2. And I'm going to give you a second. Can you guess what my number 1 book is? I haven't said it yet. I read this book, I think in January last year, maybe February. And it's been on the top of my mind ever since then. It's The Frozen River by Ariel Lahan. I loved this book. I loved this book so much. It's a historical fiction about a midwife in Maine in the 1700s, late 1700s. Martha Ballard is a midwife, real life woman who kept a daily journal of her activities. And that is kind of the basis of this story. Obviously, Ariel Lahan adds fictionalization to it, but a lot of the events and people are true to real life. I think Martha Ballard was just such an interesting woman, and living in a time where women's opinions weren't necessarily highly regarded. And yet she had a husband who lifted her up and encouraged her. I loved the relationship between Martha and her husband that was portrayed in this book. Also, the whole mystery of the man who's found floating dead in the river, or caught up in the ice in the river. That's how the book starts. Martha, as a midwife, is called upon to kind of give somewhat of an autopsy to help see if she can figure out what happened. This man, along with another prominent person in their town, had been accused of sexually assaulting another woman in town. Martha stands on the side of this woman. There's a whole court case. The town is slightly divided. People don't necessarily believe her. There's some graphic scenes in here. The midwifery scenes are pretty graphic at times, and there's a couple other scenes that are like, whoa, that took me aback. But I remember so much of the story. I loved the writing. I was invested. I loved it so much, and it stayed in my mind as the top book of my reading in 2024. So there you have it. They're all upside down now. But here's my list of 10, minus James and So I Roar. I would love to hear if your lists contain any of those. But we're gonna keep moving, because this might be a little bit of a longer video, but I have more things to talk to you about, and I don't want to split it into multiple videos. So I have 4 nonfiction books that stand out, and these are not arranged in any kind of an order. I will say the 2 of these that I did a group read along this year that were just phenomenal. One was a reread for me, The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. It's a memoir of a woman who lives in the Netherlands in World War II, and her family end up hiding refugees, Jewish and other refugees who are trying to escape the Nazi Party, the Nazis, as they spread throughout Western Europe. And she's a Christian, and it's a family of faith, and it's just phenomenal story. They do end up getting captured and taken to concentration camps themselves. I just absolutely loved this story. I'm so glad that I returned to it. The other one that I did as a read along this year was also a reread for me that I haven't read in years and years and years. Hind's Feet on High Places by Hannah Hurnard is an allegory of our Christian faith walk, and told through the eyes of this deer called Much Afraid, who has to travel through all different kinds of landscapes and adventures, is given 2 companions along the way that are unexpected. The shepherd represents God in leading her to the high places ultimately. And it was beautiful. Our discussions about this were really wonderful, and I just found so much encouragement and challenge in here as well. Things to relate to, things to think about. Thought it was fantastic. So there are live discussions saved on my channel for both of those books from earlier in the year. Another totally different thread, a book that I read that is history related, is Sharon McMahon's The Small and the Mighty. I just talked about this in December. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I really loved this book by Sharon, just highlighting different people in American history who may not be in our history books, but who had a great impact on our nation and on history because of their resilience, their dedication, their education, their desire to help people be the best that they can be in whatever form that is, their a determination to stand up for what is right. So many different things. I love Sharon's love for America and for our history, and I think that this book is fantastic. So it had to be on a list, but I didn't want to put it in with all the fiction. So that's why I have a short little list of these nonfiction here. The fourth nonfiction, the one book that I'd like to highlight, is called Wild Hope by Donna Ashworth. This is a book of poetry. I don't really know where to put poetry. I'm putting it with nonfiction because it makes the most sense to me. It's not a story. These are beautiful poems, many of which stood out to me, and I feel like this is something that I will revisit time and time again. I absolutely loved this. This collection in particular contains healing words to find light on dark days. I really do feel like it speaks to grief, to hope, to holding on when things look tough, to believing in yourself, to believing in others. I just found so many poems in here that I really loved, so I wanted to highlight that one more time. And finally, we're going to switch gears and talk about my top 10 middle grade reads of the year. I read quite a few middle grade. I will have a video coming out that has like stats and highlights of the year. I haven't done that one yet either. Oh, I'm running so late this year. But these are my top 10, again, ranked from 10 to 1 for what it's worth. I don't know that it would be the same ranking if I did this on a different day, but today this is from 10 to 1 favorite middle grades of 2024. So at number 10 is one that I can't find. I know that I have it on my shelves somewhere, but it is Wolf Hollow by Lauren Wolk. I read 2 Lauren Wolk books in 2024, and this one I liked a little better than the other. This one deals with bullying, deals with a man who has PTSD from a war that he fought in, a family that supports each other. I really enjoyed this book. I just really liked it. So it's on the list at number 10. Number 9 is Al Capone Does My Shirts by Jennifer Chaldanko. This is about a family who moves to the island of Alcatraz for the dad's new job. There's a young boy and his sister, and she has autism spectrum disorder, and so has a lot of difficulty. She's not incredibly verbal. I can't remember if she's nonverbal at all or if she talks a little bit, but difficult for other people to understand her. And the mom puts a lot of pressure on this 12-year-old boy to take care of his sister and to have a lot more responsibilities than I believe that he needed to have at 12 years old. And really what stands out to me is the anger that I felt at the mom. I remember showing up, I read this in March, and I showed up with Amanda and Katie, my middle grade March co-hosts, and I had been listening to this in the car on the drive to go get them, and I was like, guys, I want to punch her in the face. I was so angry with the mom and the choices that she was making, both with her son and her daughter. But yeah, this really stands out to me as a good read. I think it surprised me because this cover does nothing for me. I do not get drawn in at all by this cover. At all. But the book was fantastic. Then number 8, I also don't know where it is. It's a Catherine Marsh book called Nowhere Boy. And I first read Catherine Marsh last year and loved her book Lost Year. And so I was thrilled to read Nowhere Boy this year. And it follows a young boy who ends up hiding a Syrian refugee in his basement for a while. And it just talks about these 2 boys and their similarities and differences and caring for other people and doing our part. It was a phenomenal read. I really love Catherine Marsh's writing, and I had to include it on this list. because it was just so good. Number 7 is another surprise for me, and that is The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. This is Peter Jackson, the first book in Peter Jackson and the Olympian series. I really loved this. It was such a fun adventure story. I feel like I'm so late to the game in reading this one, but Peter is a half-blood. He is the son of a god. And he doesn't really know that at the beginning, but he gets to go to the Camp Half-Blood, where he gets to learn about this whole other part of the world. And he gets sent on an adventure. There's a quest, and I just thought it was a good adventure. I was invested from the beginning to the end. I did not put this series on my series list because I don't feel like I'm going to continue the series at this point in time, but I may someday because I really did love that first book. I'm cheating. For number 6, I'm putting a whole series. I'm putting the Track series by Jason Reynolds. Guys, this is a phenomenal series. It's so good. We follow 4 different kids, Ghost, Patina, Sunny, and Lou, who are on this track team. It's like a community track team, not necessarily connected to the school. And we get in each book, each kid's story, which is slightly different, all incredibly moving and heartwarming. My favorite, I think, was Patina, but I really loved Ghost as well. I loved them all. They're so good. The coach is phenomenal. He has like a father figure role for some of these kids who are coming from some tough home situations. But the friendship that develops, the rivalry, the competitiveness, the running, like I just loved every aspect of these books. I loved it. And so I had to put the whole series on my list. Oh, a book that had me crying over a dog, my friends, right? I don't normally cry over a dog, but in a book I will at times. That's Rain Rain by Anne M. Martin. This is about a young girl who has a dog who she names Rain Rain. She's neurodivergent as well. It's unnamed in the book. She's obsessed with homonyms and points them out at sometimes appropriate times, sometimes not so appropriate times, has a difficulty making friends at school, but really, really loves her dog. There's a huge storm in town, hurricane level storm. The bridge up to their land gets flooded, gone, like they're kind of stranded. And the dog had gotten out during the storm and is now missing. There's a really tense relationship between Rose and her father. But there's an uncle who I don't remember at this point if it's truly an uncle or if it's like a family friend who really does connect with Rose and helps. She's determined she's going to find her dog. She starts writing to shelters all around the area and is on the hunt to find the dog. The compassion that is shown in this book by the uncle towards Rose, but also later Rose as the story unfolds, I just thought was so beautiful. I read this in a day. I was sobbing. It was so emotional. Oh, I loved it so much. I just loved Rose. I loved the friendships. I loved the family. I loved Rose herself. I think she's a gem, and this book is a gem as well. Number 3 is one that we did for one of our book club books for the Middle Grade March book club this year. We did a quarterly book, and in November we read Simon Sort of Says by Erin Bow, and I really enjoyed this story. It was another surprise for me. In my mind, this was going to be a bit more sci-fi than it was, but really it's another story of friendship, which is very popular, typical of a middle grade book. But we follow Simon, who moves to this dead zone, quiet zone, moves to this town that's in the National Quiet Zone where they are trying to communicate with space or like hear sounds from space. So there are no wires, no, not electricity, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no radio signals, nothing allowed in the town itself. His family moves there because Simon is the lone survivor of a school shooting where they used to live. And that is really tackled in this book, the PTSD on Simon's part and on his parents' part. I loved the family in here. I loved the first few friends that Simon makes and how they have their own differences and struggles and still find ways to connect with Simon. I just love the friendships. I feel like I could say that about every middle grade. I love the family and I love the friendships, but for real, I just love that in this book. The look at PTSD was so important. Simon and his two friends are determined to fake out sounds from space, alien communication, whatever. It just was so ridiculous and brought a lot of humor to a book that could be very heavy if we were only dealing with Simon and his PTSD. And as you hear about what happened, the events of what happened, it's just incredibly heartbreaking. So those moments of humor that were in here were really needed for this heavy topic. Oh man, it was so good. It was so good. Another book that punched a big punch is at number 2 on my list, and that is Orbiting Jupiter by Gary D. Schmidt. It's not very long. You can read it in a very short amount of time, but holy moly, this book, it just punched me in the gut at the end. Following Jack and his family, they get a foster son named Joseph, and Joseph has had a really tough go of it. And it's a story of Jack finding ways to connect with Joseph. I loved Jack and his family, and I loved learning about Joseph's story as well. He's rough and tough on the outside, but as they learn more and more about him and they find ways to connect with him, and then Joseph doesn't seem to want to connect, but then he stands up for Jack against some bullies, and the events that lead up to the ending and the ending itself, like really tough, really powerful story. And I loved it. It's number 2 on my list. And my top middle grade book of the year, my number 1 middle grade, is Lasagna Means I Love You by Kate O'Shaughnessy. I absolutely loved this story following Mo, who just recently lost her grandmother, who is basically her only family. She goes into foster care. Her grandmother always tried to get Mo to get a hobby and try new things. And one of the days that she's in the social work office, I believe, she sees a cookbook on a shelf and gets this idea in her head that she wants to learn how to cook. But more importantly, she wants to learn recipes from people and tell the recipe with the story that goes along with it, because stories have meaning and stories have importance and carry family history, and family legends and different things get passed down with recipes often, as she noticed when she was reading through this cookbook. So she gets the idea in her head that she is going to start sharing these recipes, learning to cook, sharing the recipes, starting a blog, and in hopes of finding her own family, like more of her own family out there through the stories that she's telling. So it's just a really sweet, beautiful story of Mo grieving the loss of her grandma, trying something new. All of these stories that she discovers as she gets to know people, and just her way of finding connections with other people, and then ultimately finding a family of her own, even if it's not exactly what she expected when she started out on this journey. It was a beautiful story. I absolutely loved it. And it's my top middle grade for 2024. So there you have it. Quite a long list of favorites this year. I would love to know if you have any of these middle grade or nonfiction or fiction books on your favorites of the year as well, or what were some of your favorite reads. I love taking a look at my list and discovering kind of what were favorites, what stands out, what do I remember. It's so much fun, and I love watching other people's favorites of the year too. And if you don't really have any favorites or anything you want to say about the books that I showed right here, go ahead and put a thumbs up or a celebrate or something that represents a favorite. Number 1, that 100 thing. Whatever represents a favorite to you, put that emoji in the comments down below. I love chatting with you guys in the comments though, so feel free to leave me a comment. And that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here so much. Sorry this is so late. And I look forward to chatting with you in another video very soon. Bye.